In this video, I'm conducting an interview with Albert Steg. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoy this video. Please like and subscribe, and you'll be notified every time I upload a new video. Please let me know what you think in the comments below and what you'd like to see in future videos so I can work on that. My book, Backgammon, Backgame Strategies, is available. There's a link in the description to where you can get it. And if you're interested in lessons, please email me. My email address is in the description. Again, in this video, it's my pleasure to be interviewing Albert Steg. Thank you for joining me and welcome.
Thanks, Alex. It's very flattering to be asked. You're interviewing a lot of luminaries and interesting people, so it's always flattering to be included in this kind of a project.
It's my pleasure. I know you're very involved in backgammon, so we'd love to hear a lot about the things you have to say. How are you doing today?
Oh, great. Lovely clear day up here in Manchester, Massachusetts.
Okay, so you're near the Boston area.
That's right, right. And I lived in Cambridge for about 25 years, and my wife and I were looking for things to do during COVID, walking around. And one day we walked around Manchester and thought, wow, it'd be nice to live out here in the country. So we packed up from Cambridge about 2 years ago, and we're very happy.
Okay, great. I'd love to talk about all of that and a lot of backgammon. I'd like to actually start with some biographical information, if I may. Can you tell us, please, where you grew up and where you did your education and work and things like that?
Yeah, I have a pretty eclectic history. I moved around a lot. I was born in Dayton, Ohio, and then my family moved to New York City. So my childhood was Brooklyn and Manhattan in the late 60s. And I think I was among the last generation of sort of free-range kids in New York City. Just 7 years old and buying comic books, by picking up soda bottles in Central Park and things like that when we were still unsupervised. Then I wound up going to live with my aunt and uncle in the Chicago area, Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, actually, just north of there. So then I was living there in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and then college, I went to Middlebury, Vermont, and studied English. Wanted to be an English teacher. And so then I went into teaching and taught English, high school English at the Lawrenceville School in New Jersey. I went to Scotland. I lived in Scotland for 3 years. I did a master's degree there in philosophy.
Wow.
Shout out to all the English major backgammon players. It seems that excuse me.
Yep.
Backgammon is populated by a lot of highly numerate people, and I'm really not one. I always like to say, if I can get good at backgammon, you don't need math.
Right, right.
I studied philosophy there and taught, and then I moved to Boston in the 90s. So I've been in this area ever since.
And you're still teaching?
No, that was my first career for about 25 years. And I took a really interesting detour into film preservation. I went to Rochester, New York, where Kodak is based. And the George Eastman mansion was turned into a film archive. So I studied motion picture preservation there, and I learned a lot of archival practices that have served me well. And then I wound up finding I had a niche talent in database design, and there's a software program called FileMaker Pro that I use for my own collecting and practical tasks. And I discovered there are a lot of archives that use it but haven't implemented it very well. Poorly designed databases, and I would go and use them and go, I could actually make this better. So then I wound up doing freelance database work for several years. And at this point, I just turned 60 and I'm pretty much retired. So I'm fortunate to be in a situation where I can just devote myself to backgammon.
Yeah, that's good for you. You're nice and relaxed. And you're married, you said, right?
That's right. Yeah.
You have children?
12 years. No kids. We have nieces and nephews in nearby Essex. So that's nice. We like being with kids, but we also like our martini hour to be undisturbed.
That's right. That's why you look so young. I have two young kids and they take up a lot of my time.
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate it. We need those.
Right. I know you said you lived in Albuquerque. I lived there for 1 year. How long were you there?
Oh, really? That was junior high in the 70s, in
Yeah.
the 70s. Yeah, mid 70s. How
Is
about
that
you?
where you got that necktie?
Oh, no, actually, I just always liked bolo ties. And I I went to Denver, the Denver tournament in
Yeah.
September. That was a great event. Dan Minardi puts
Yes.
together a great tournament. And there was I sought out a nice Indian jeweler shop downtown and scored two bolo ties.
That's nice. Those are very, very popular in Colorado, New Mexico. When I was there, people would wear them, and yeah, that's a great tournament in Denver. I actually spoke with Linda Clay this morning, and she used to run the tournament before that. And when I was in Albuquerque, I went to that tournament one time. It was a short flight for me, so that
Hmm.
was always fun.
Yep.
So when did you first get into backgammon?
I started playing in the 70s in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. It was a country club brat, and there's a nice backgammon table, outside the dining room. So there was, my days were filled in the summers with tennis and backgammon and golf. It was a pretty popular game then. It seemed everyone played, at least in tennis clubs. It was very popular. So I picked it up then. This is a fun thing to do, and back then there were just a lot of people played. In high school, I had friends that played. We'd play for 25 cents a point. And, once you get in that kind of competitive mode, it really sticks, I think. And I had a little edge because I'd read a backgammon book. And I went to Walden Books in the Coronado Shopping Center. So I picked up Backgammon for Blood.
Oh, is that the one by Bruce Becker?
By Bruce Becker. Yeah, it's loaded with attitude and not much else really. But actually having read one book, even that book is it gives you an edge over people who have read no books, at least back at that day in those days.
Yeah, so
Um,
you've been playing for a long time. Do you have other interests or hobbies outside of backgammon?
uh, I've always been a collector. Was in Brooklyn as a kid. I was collecting bottle caps, and then it was Marvel comic books, and eventually films. I was a film collector. That's how I got into the film preservation work. Ephemeral films, old educational films, home movies, uh, and I've kind of I passed along my film collections to some archives that wanted them, and now I collect backgammon stuff.
Yeah, that's great. I know you have a lot of, do you collect boards or articles or what is it that you collect?
Yeah, it's mostly I like in particular I like the old Bakelite backgammon checkers from the 30s.
Right?
And I've done a lot of study of the 1930s backgammon boom when doubling was first invented and the Chouette.
Right.
Actually, would you like me to show you that?
Yeah, well, let's
We'll
talk about
do
that
that
in
later.
just a moment, because there are some other questions. But yeah,
Mhm.
those ones are nice.
Yeah. But I don't collect too many boards. I mostly just buy boards that I actually use because I like collecting things that I can display and enjoy looking at. I
Right.
don't want to have a warehouse full of stuff. I
I've seen
like to
people that have
have
that. It's funny.
yeah, yeah. So I have six really nice boards I play on, and then I have maybe five others that are just for historical interest. But
What are your favorite boards to play on? A lot of people are interested in that.
all right. My most recent board is a new Bob Zavarol. I have three of his. Um, I sent him a really nice set of Bakelite checkers, which I think is the way to go if you're going to get a custom board. You should start with the checkers, find a set of checkers you really like, and then you select the point and field colors to complement them and get the dimensions of the board, built around the checkers so they don't slosh around. Um, I My other favorite one is by Mustafa Saeed. He's I don't know how active he is lately. I haven't been able to get a reply from Mustafa. Mustafa, if you're out there, yeah, I want to talk to you sometime. I'd like to resurface my board one time. Uh, but he makes these gorgeous sort of wood framed ones, just very nice craftsmanship. So
Yeah,
those are my favorites.
I heard about that one, and I know Bob personally.
Mm.
He's very nice, and I know he's
Yep.
been making the boards. He's been playing for a long time. He's a very good player, and he makes really beautiful boards. I've seen him, and the things that I like about the boards are that they're the leather. They're not the wooden ones, so they're lighter weight. And he has some unique aspects to it, like the racks, and he has the double racks, so you can put the cubes in there, and it's just like made by a player for a player.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, they're we're spoiled with a whole pantheon of great board makers now. It's really interesting that back in the 90s it was pretty much Chrysloid boards everywhere, and Bob was doing work then, but and Tech Morioka, but
Yes.
now there are dozens of really good quality boards out there at different price points. So it's nice time to be playing backgammon.
Yeah, the ones that I have is my most recent one is an FM Gammon board. It's the one actually in my background. I like that because it's the surfaces you can change very easily. So
Mm,
it's like having another board.
yeah.
But the wooden frame makes it heavy and a little hard to travel. But I don't do a lot of traveling, so that's okay.
Mhm, mhm,
Before that I had a P41, which is nice as well. They make some really nice high quality stuff.
mhm.
It does have a unique sound when you're playing. So
Yes.
yeah, you have to get used to that. So yeah, I enjoy that stuff too. I collect boards. I don't have as many boards, but I enjoy those. I haven't seen the Mustafa Saeed boards in person, but I've heard of them. It sounds similar to maybe what are you familiar with the TT Gammon ones that are made in Turkey?
Yeah, but I'd say his boards are on a very different level of
Yeah,
gorgeousness. Yeah.
I'd love to see them in person one time.
Yeah, you really
Uh,
need to. That's why it's good to go to a big tournament like New York or the
yeah,
Nordic or something. It's like
yeah,
a
yeah. You see
it's
all
like a
that.
showroom.
We had the Los Angeles tournament here recently, so that was fun. I was helping out with the commentary.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of people there. So I know everyone's a little bit different, but what are the things you enjoy most about backgammon?
Oh, it's interesting. There are different modes of play that I really enjoy. And one of the big ones is that, I like to be in pleasant surroundings, social surroundings, public places. So I like to have ideally a tavern or a cafe that, where I would like to spend time anyway. So it's a place that I might be having a coffee and reading a book, uh, or I'll be sitting there playing backgammon. And so I've been fortunate to happen upon um, backgammon milieus at different parts of my. There have been times in my life of backgammon and times of my life of no backgammon. Like
Yeah,
college, I didn't have anyone to play with; it just didn't turn up. Um, and then when I was in Scotland, there was a terrific cafe called Negotiants in Edinburgh, and we had a little scene going there. The owner liked to play, so I kept a board there. And there were about a half dozen of us. And there's a young lady named Cecilia Spark, uh, who's a prominent player now in the UK. And I bumped into her in Cyprus. We were both, I was playing in a Chouette with some of the Brits, and there's this woman there, and we're kind of looking at each other like, you kind of look familiar. We're like, how would I know you? And it's like, oh, Edinburgh. So,
yeah,
like, that was great. And when I moved to Boston, there was a thriving scene in Harvard Square out in the summers in the when the weather was warm. There was this wonderful plaza with chess players and musicians and expatriates drinking coffee, and you could just drop by there. You didn't have to make a date. You didn't have to call people and say, "Hey, let's play." It was just people would show up, and there were times in the summer there'd be a couple different Chouettes going at different stake rates. And so that's for me the ideal backgammon thing, sort of a drop in, people play. Of course, the other setting I like is a nice martini bar where I can have my gin martinis while I'm playing. And so for me, the surroundings are important. Like when I came to Boston, there was a Cavendish club that I'd
Yes.
heard about, and I was like, "Oh, it's great! There's going to be a backgammon club. I can, go to the backgammon club." And I went there, and it was like, oh, it was like cigarette smoke. It was fluorescent lights. It was stale coffee, and kind of miserable looking people, and like a folding table. I was like, no, like I don't. Even if I were a favorite in this room, I would not really want to hang out here. No offense to anyone who did, because it's great to have a place, regular place like that. But I'd rather do it in a setting. But
Yeah,
um,
you enjoy the
but anyway,
social.
there's that, and then there's the whole tournament kind of experience is a different level of formality and a different way of thinking. So there's the Chouette mode of play, there's the tournament mode, and then there's just sitting at home and working at the game, which I really enjoy. Um, you know, Honing in on a particular aspect of play that I need, to get better at, and practicing against XG, sort of repetitive practice of certain scenarios. I love doing that.
Yeah, I
Uh,
was going to ask you about that because you're one of the top ranked players. What have you done to improve, and how do you recommend other people to improve? I know you mentioned XG, but what are the other things?
yeah, the answer is probably different for people at different stages. So for beginners or people who are maybe in the teens of PR, first thing, you got to play a lot. And if you want to improve, it's probably because you love the game and you've got the bug. So you have to play a lot, and a great way to do it is to play Chouettes, where you're not the strongest players, where you can consult after the cube is turned at least, or maybe even more than that. Um, Boston has always had a lot of strong players. um, and I've generally been fortunate to sort of be in the upper half of players in my given milieu. Um, but if there are people stronger than you, you can always learn more. And ironically, if you're the strongest player, you might not be motivated to learn more. And I think in the '90s, I would read books, but not in a very deliberate way. Um, I'd read books back then. I remember like reading some of Roberti's books, and I'd argue with them in my head. It'd be like quizzing myself, and okay, I think this is the answer. Then the answer turns out something. I go, oh, come on, like that's nitpicking or something. That's one of the most fruitless ways of going about reading about backgammon. Um, but I have that too. Like people come up to me in a tournament sometime and ask my opinion on a position, and I'll have a confident answer. Then they'll just argue with me. And it's like, well, okay. Like, um, but yeah. So at different points, in the '90s there were 12 to 20 players that would come and go at different times. And if you're in the upper third, you're going to do fine, and you don't really have to be at the top of you don't have to be improving. Then in the thousands, the the scene dried up quite a bit. People moved away, or people moved on to other games, poker, or they just got discouraged in backgammon. And then there were only like 5 or 6 of us, and suddenly I was not in the top half anymore. And then I started losing, and I didn't like that. I really didn't like losing more than I won, at year's end. And I keep meticulous records of my play, which is something I'm surprised more people don't do. Actually, I have my current scorebook right here.
Uh-huh.
So it's all here. Like this is
Wow.
recent on AP, the Bill Riles jackpot,
Oh,
several
good.
of those matches. And then here, this is a recent session I played with my friend Ed. We play what I call prop sessions, where every time there's a cube decision, somebody doubles, then we each have to decide whether it's a take or a drop. So we have a couple extra dice. So we each take a die, and then you hide your hand, and then when you're ready, you put your hand up and then open it. And if there's a die, if you drop a die, you drop the cube. If your
Uh-huh.
hand is empty, you're saying it's a take.
Okay.
So if we disagree, then we prop it for 5 games.
I see.
You have to prop it for 5. And then after 5, the loser, the guy who's down on the prop, can force another 5. And then we have a bet on top of it. It just makes for a really interesting session. Like now I find just heads up money play a little boring. So that's another mode of playing.
Yeah, I
Uh,
know they used to do that a lot in the 70s and 80s. And
yeah,
nowadays, when I play in the Chouette, when people have a prop, they just bet on it and they put it in the computer and they get their answer and they win that bet, then they can move on to another bet.
right, right. You can always contract it. You can always say, okay, we have a 36 game contract or something. I used to do that with Herb Gerland a lot. He used to run the NABC. He passed about 10 years ago. He was a far stronger player than I, and he'd wind up winning props against me even when he was on the wrong side of them.
Yeah,
They,
yeah.
they call him the prop meister for good reason.
I
But
think
actually,
this
that
is,
was what I was getting to was
yeah,
that that was around the time when I was the regular players were mostly better than me. So Herb was stronger than me. Local guy Alex Zamanian, super strong player who
yeah.
doesn't go to tournaments outside the area very much, but he's I think one of the best in the country. Couple of Matt Reclatus, strong players, and so at that point, I was just not. I was getting angry. I was getting in a bad mood, and I was finding my temper was bad. And I thought, okay, I've got to get better at backgammon, or I can't keep playing because this is not fun. I'm not saying I have to win all the time, but I'm a competitive person, I guess.
Right.
So that's when I really started going after the game. And the first thing I did was studying the opening because uh, I realized, actually, I realized when I went to Chicago and I took the Mochi proficiency test for the first time, and I got my result back, and in the opening, I got a D. I got a D on the opening, and then the middle and late, I was more like BB plus. Uh, and then I realized, oh, that's because I've learned backgammon playing Chouettes, where we don't consult until the cube is turned.
Right.
So we're never talking about the opening or arguing about why to make one play or another. So my concept was very weak. And at that time, there weren't books on the opening. Michi's book hadn't come out yet, and Bill Roberti's recent 3-volume set certainly hadn't come out. So the first thing I did was a really thorough, I just went through, roll by roll, all the openings. So I started with the 2-1 opening and then all 21 replies to the 2-1, then the 3-1, then the 4-1, and the variant openings and all those replies. So I did a really exhaustive study of those, and I wrote up a little paper. Basically, since there was no book about it, I went online and I looked at articles and I read Jeremy Beguy's piece, and I cobbled together my own understanding of the opening, which was a little different from anything else I read. So that's up on the USBGF site.
I saw that. I'll put a link
Yeah.
in there in the
Yeah,
description.
thank you. And yeah, people, I've gotten a lot of nice feedback about that. Um, yeah, so I forgot where I was going with all this, but yeah, improving. So,
Improving.
I went at it as hard as I could, and then I did plateau at some point. I got myself fit under 6 PR. I was in the high 5s, and I just wasn't getting any better. I was kind of spinning my wheels. And so that's when I went to take some lessons, right? I feel like you can go a long way in backgammon, but inevitably you'll sort of plateau and probably need some help. So I called up, I got in touch with David Presser, who is a player I admire a great deal, and got some lessons and got into the 4s pretty quickly. He was a very effective teacher, and I'd narrowed down some topics. There were just some things I didn't know about, and he had some very good ways of uh, dealing with match scores in particular. As a person, as I mentioned, who's an English major and not, I don't I don't really want to learn how to calculate doubling windows. I'm risking 19% for
Right.
40%. And my brain is not, I'm sure I could if I really wanted to work hard at it. Like I could probably also learn how to draw. I'm not good at that either, but it's not fun for me, the kind of math. But fortunately, there are some ways of thinking about match scores that don't require a lot. And he was good at teaching me some very practical strategies for thinking about match scores. I still have to learn my take points though for recubes, which is probably one of my next tasks. If I really want to, get, I think, to the next level, which would be Grandmaster. I got my Master 1 rating from BMAB last year or two, which I'm very proud of. So to get that further thing, I think I do need to get a little bit more numerate, maybe about some aspects of Recube in
Yeah,
particular.
fortunately there are some shortcuts in terms of match considerations without having to do some of
Hmm.
the math. I've studied this myself, and it's like I've done some videos on match scores. I did one in particular with John O'Hagan, which was really good.
Hmm.
If you kind of the main thing I think about is you want to get to your goal. So you want to get to zero away. If you get to plus one away, that's too much. You don't want over.
Hmm.
So if you think about those kinds of things and think about valuable scores to be at, like two away, four away is more valuable than five away, and where you're going to be getting to if you
Right.
double and win or don't, and vice versa for the
Hmm.
opponent. Those are important things. And I found it interesting that you said you first started studying with the openings, because that's exactly what I did when I
Hmm.
started studying in detail. It was a little over 20 years ago. I got my first software, which was Snowy at the time.
Hmm.
And, just like XG now, you put in positions and it'll give you the answers. And there's so much to study. I thought to myself, what's the first thing to study? And I thought, why don't we study the opening roles, because the opening position is the most common position in backgammon. So you better study that one
Yep.
well. And of course, the opening roles are fairly straightforward to memorize, but then the replies. So I
Yeah.
went through that. We'll go through a couple because I know that's interesting. I
Yes.
actually did rollouts of all the opening replies, and I had a book of like 200 pages before. This was over 10, 15 years ago, before
Uh-huh.
all of it was available. I did
Right.
that. I actually wrote an entire book that's unpublished about backgammon openings, and a lot of the recent ones have similar themes in that. But doing that and studying that is great for me. When I played in the Chouettes here locally in Los Angeles, the rules are a little bit different, so it's much harder to learn because there's no consulting at all.
Oh.
So when you consult after the cube, you can discuss, why you want to do this, and you learn, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like we couldn't do that. So I
Yeah.
studied, by reading books, doing XG, all that stuff.
Well, Bill Roberti pointed out to me, like, when I was working on that, I was talking to him and he said, it's a great idea. He said, no one benefits from a backgammon book more than the guy who wrote it. This,
Yes, you told me that too.
yeah, you just the task of having to integrate all of your observations and articulate principles. It makes you go the extra mile for sort of cementing things.
Yeah. So nowadays you run the New England Backgammon Club, correct?
Yeah, I help run it. I'm one of the organizers. NEBC has been around since the 70s, and I think we've been fortunate. There's always been somebody willing to sort of step up and organize, set the dates, get out the word, uh, run the tournament. So I run it with Rich Sweetman and Marty Storer,
Oh yeah.
and Brad Mampy these days is helping out. So it's a shared task, but I take care of the website, which is a big deal,
Right.
and the points race and sort of uh, I sort of MC the events, I guess.
Yeah.
Try
I
to
know
make
Marty
people.
Storr is an outstanding player, but he said he lives in New Hampshire, is that correct? That's what he
Yes, yeah, I think he lives just over the border in New Hampshire. Yeah, we have a very strong club here. between Marty and Alex, Adahola plays once in a while. It's a tough group.
So how often do you have tournaments there?
NEVs has a monthly tournament. Um, Back in the 90s when I first came, we had weekly tournaments, and then that dropped in the late 90s to just a weekly tournament. And then the club really waned. Early thousands were I wasn't playing then. I'd gone to Rochester, as I mentioned, and I think they were down to just getting like 6 or 8 people for a monthly tournament for a while there. And then around 2009, 2010, it started picking up again. I think maybe 2000, yeah, around then. And so we gradually built up our numbers, and then we finally reinstated the an intermediate division uh,
Uh,
about 7 years ago, which was a big plus. It's really tough to have world champion level grandmasters playing with virtual beginners in competitive play and asking people to pay $30 to enter. So now we have 2 divisions again, and we're getting pretty good turnout. We're getting about 30 players on a Sunday, and we're hoping that number will continue to grow.
That's great. I spoke with Bill Roberti about that, and he told me back in the day, I think it might have been the 70s or 80s, the person that was running it, he said there would be over 100 players in a weekly tournament. And
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
amazing. What are
it does. And a lot of time they would have a sit down dinner, I guess. And I'm sorry I missed that period.
I
I kind of
know.
came in the 90s. They were still getting like 60 players on a weekend, for a Sunday tournament. But yeah, that heyday was I kind of missed out on in the 80s
Right.
also.
What are the things that you try to do? I know you work with the website, but what are the things you try to do to get more people to come play? How do you recruit them?
Yeah, well, the first thing that I really felt we needed was a good website. We didn't really have much of a internet presence, and what I think you really need to have is a web presence. So when people Google backgammon, you know, Massachusetts or Boston, they find you, and that when they find you, your organization looks like it's fun and looks like it's substantial and worth checking out. So that's, I think, an important thing. We also use Meetup, the
Yeah.
Meetup website. When I moved up here to Cape Ann, Manchester, Massachusetts, near Gloucester, or perfect storm place.
Yeah.
I set up a Meetup group to try to find players in this area, and that's borne some fruit. There are definitely some players I've gotten in touch with here who are more like intermediate beginner types, and they've started coming. But generally, we haven't had a lot of hits from Meetup, aside from those people that I found in my area. When
Yeah.
new people come, I always ask them how they found us, and it's almost always that it was a Google search on
It's great.
Backgammon. That somehow they'd gotten interested in the game and got us that way. And then, the other really important thing is you need to be welcoming and have fun, when they show up. Um, I think the New England Backgammon Club is for many years now has been the New England Backgammon Tournament. Basically, there is no real club experience aside from playing the tournament. And I think in an earlier day when there were so many people, they had a paper newsletter. They would have dinners. They would have dinners followed by a tournament. They would have benefit tournaments, for local charities and things. Whereas that kind of shrank down to just being a tournament. And so, if people are coming new and they're coming in the door and all you're doing is saying, okay, pay your entry fee, go wait for your match, that's not why people necessarily come to your tournament. I think backgammon players often imagine that everyone's going to come to the game the way they come to the game. which is you're already a competitor.
Right.
Whereas a lot of people are looking for something to do, and that's the meetup idea. It's like, oh, look, here's a game. Like maybe I can go there. Maybe I'll meet some nice people. So you want to greet them and talk to them and get to know their names and introduce some other people and make sure they have a pleasant social experience as opposed to just being run through the backgammon ringer by world champion players.
Right, right. And nowadays in the digital age, everything is on the website, online,
Yeah.
and Meetup. That's a good segue because I know you wanted to go through your website. Do you want to go ahead and share your
Oh,
screen and
sure.
show us that, please?
Yeah. Okay. I have it here. Just let me get to the front page there. All right.
I
And
see that there was a way you made it a little bigger. Oh, you had, there you
yeah,
go.
there we
Okay,
go.
good.
So it's just a WordPress website that Matt Reclatus helped me get it up. And then, I created the categories and things. So, we have our events and, a picture where we play and the dates and things. Um, One reason I want to show the website, though, actually was just to show off one of my other pastimes. You asked me earlier about collecting, and
Yes.
I really like collecting these vintage backgammon materials and historical pieces from the 30s. Um, so part of the way I enjoy the collection is to make it accessible to people. So I've created this gallery of backgammon Bakelite. So this is all about the sort of decorative 1930s era Catalan Bakelite checker sets. And so there's all sorts of things just about how you can tell what Bakelite is. Some
Yeah,
things.
so for some of the viewers, what exactly is that and why is that important or unique?
Yeah, Bakelite is a kind of an industrial material first. And then in the 30s, this Catalan corporation uh, created a new variation of it that was highly decorative. So you get these glorious sparkling colors that you see here. It's also very dense material, so there's a really satisfying heft and weight, clackiness to them when you handle Bakelite checkers that you have to kind of feel in person if you go to a tournament. Um, so there were popular uses like bangles. There's a lot of Bakelite brooches and necklaces and bracelets are very collectible. Um, Housewares, cutlery handles, various things. But it landed this lovely new wonder material right when backgammon was having its first American boom in the 1930s. It was just kind of a nice coincidence, I think. So there got to be all of these really wonderful doubling devices and dice and checkers. And so this is just a gallery of some of the nicer pieces that some of these are in my collection and some are other people's collections or things I see on eBay. And I just kind of scarf up the photographs. So there's this whole section here of the Backgammon Museum, I call it. It's just a display. And I've recently done a really close study of the 1930s, which was really just 2 years, 1930 and 31. So I wrote up a kind of a history of backgammon in the 1930s that I think if people are at all interested might find intriguing. Part of my archival work with film preservation kind of lent itself to this sort of researching and online archives and keeping track of stuff. There's a whole section about doubling devices. So people ask, when was the doubling cube invented? And they really mean when was doubling invented? Because doubling actually was invented around 1926, 25. The doubling cube didn't come along until 1930.
Hmm.
So originally there were no devices. People used matchsticks. And then the cube showed up around 1930, early 1930. So that's all here. And that's just sort of, for me, it's like a little sandbox, so it's a place for me to indulge my geekiness around history. It's just nothing like the thrill of a hunt. You're looking for some tidbit of information. I found this one that I'm showing right here. This is an article from the 1931 London Evening Standard, where Grosvenor Nicholas actually mentions that he originated the doubling cube, which was news. No one had found this before. So there's these little eureka moments. It's kind of the collector's reward. That's why collectors collect, is finding the little nugget of history that has been undiscovered. So other people might enjoy.
Yes, you are quite the historian for backgammon, and I see online on the Facebook forums whenever someone has a question about something like that, you always have the answers.
I often have the answer. I chirp in when I know what I know. um, yeah. Um, yeah, and particularly the 30s. And I'm going to move on now to the 40s and 50s, which was kind of a fallow time for backgammon. There's no new books were being written in the 40s and 50s really to speak of, until things picked up in the late 60s again. It was kind of a quiet time.
I think you'd be a good person if you wanted to write a book about the history of backgammon.
Well, I'm thinking about it.
Yeah,
It's kind of tough. Like, the website provides me that kind of experience, and the book market is tough these days. I think if I wrote a book about backgammon, I'd want it to be a general purpose book for the wider community,
right.
not for backgammon people. So there's tons of books being really great books. You wrote a great book. I haven't delved into it yet. I'm way behind. There's so many books coming out. I
There
can't
are.
process them all. But there haven't been any really, very substantial inviting books for the general public. A book that you might give someone who doesn't play, that would look nice on the coffee table, for example, or something. And
Yeah,
I
there's
think we could like the backgammon book in the 70s
right,
fulfilled, and we don't really have a book like that on the market these
like
days.
for beginners.
Yeah, yeah, largely.
There's one that just came out by Mark Olson. I don't know if you heard about that. How Not to Suck at Backgammon.
Yeah, and that's a playful title, but that's not a coffee table title. It's not something you buy for your aunt.
Yeah, yeah. I saw some of that. Yeah, it is, I think that if you're going to write a book about backgammon, it's not going to be to make money from it because that's not something, it's not like the New York Times bestsellers. You're going to sell
Yeah,
millions of copies. It's like,
yeah, and it's just a different industry now.
yeah,
Books are
yeah.
difficult.
Um, so I think one of the most fun parts about the interviews is talking about some of the positions, and we selected some
Hmm.
positions specifically for you because you did all that stuff on the second role. So um, there are a couple of positions that I've selected. I'll go ahead and share my screen here.
To
Uh,
embarrass myself by forgetting what I learned. That is another thing I find that I know a lot of the strong players I know, they have minds like steel traps. They learn a position like, oh yeah, 4-1 split. When you do this, you do that, and they just know it. I don't retain things. I need to keep coming back and drilling. So anyway, I think I'll be able to equip myself okay here. Right, 6-4.
So yes, this is one of the things that, when I mentioned I first started studying, looking at the second roll. So this is a 6-4 in response to an opening 4-2. Of course, you're playing the black checkers at the bottom. I actually selected this board because it's the colors that are similar to the one that you usually play on. You have like a brownish board, right?
Actually, oh well, my on-screen board. Yeah, it's kind of similar to my Zavrol now that you mention it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the 6-4 in response to an opening 4-1 versus an opening 3-1. So they're a little bit different. So tell us about, what are the important things to think about when you're playing these roles?
Right. Right. Okay, well, can you start with the 3-1? I think it
Yep.
might make better sense to start with the 3-1. So, one of the initial big ideas in the opening is that when your opponent has an opening roll that creates that develops his prime, right? He's posing a priming threat to you by making a new point. You really want to get those back checkers going. It's almost universally going to be the case. You're going to split. You're going to do something with those back checkers because you can't just sit back there and get yourself primed, right? So the natural play here is the split, is to come out to his bar point and down with the 4. And you often like to stay on that. There's often a question, do you park it on that bar point or do you keep it going? He's got more ways to hit you if you stay on the bar point. But when his 8 point is stripped, that's often a signal that you can afford to stay there, because when he hits you with an ace, he gives up that 8 point. So that would be kind of the natural play for me here, because I don't like to leave behind a lone straggler if I can help it. But I happen to know that I'm quite sure this is wrong. I think on this, when he makes the 5 point, you run all the way. 24-14. It's only 11 shots from the midpoint. But frankly, this is why backgammon is hard. I just elucidated a bunch of reasons why the split is good. And you can then, on the other hand, you say, well, there's other reasons why running all the way is good. You don't get hit as often. And ultimately, you just have to learn some positions, right? There are ones where, there are arguments both ways. And it's like, well, I got this one wrong enough that I'm remembering that you're actually supposed to run to the 14. That's right, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
yeah.
think about the 4-2 because that one's different.
Right. Now, the farther down his board he makes a point, the weaker the priming threat. Right. So if actually these are slides, right? You don't have XG open.
Right.
Right. So
but I have the answer and we'll show in a moment.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer this by mentioning a couple other positions. If he opens with a 5-3 or a 6-4 and makes one of his low points, he's not in a priming stance anymore, because the lower the point goes, the weaker his priming threat. And especially if he makes his deuce point, he's really giving up his priming game. So in those cases, you don't want to split because he'll attack you, right? When your opponent is posing a priming threat, splitting is very important. When he's posing an attacking threat, you tend not to split if you can help it. So in those cases, you want to make your deuce point. You go 8-2, 6-2 in answer to his making his deuce. The 4 point is kind of a hybrid one, and it's right, I think, by a very small amount to make the 2 point. Am I right?
Right.
Yeah. I think it's only like 0.01 maybe, or 0.012 or something.
Yeah, they're close.
Oh, yeah. Oh, on the rollout. Yeah. So this is actually a good example. Some people, just as a matter of pride, want to say, I made the right play, right? And I'd feel like an idiot if I ran 24-14 against this play. If you don't know how to play a follow-up your 6-4 pointing play, if you make your deuce point, you're going to give up a lot more equity than 0.007. So I would definitely not make my deuce point as XG suggests here. And actually, I did write an article about following up 6-4. I did some studies of third roll positions where I just said, okay, like if I'm going to make my deuce point with an opening 6-4, right? How do I follow that up? How does my opponent play against it? And in the third roll, I open with 6-4, I make the deuce point, he does something, and then third roll, it's hard to play. It's hard to play well. And the attraction of making your deuce point is that your opponent can make some really bad replies. For instance, if you make your deuce and your opponent gets 6-4 and doesn't make his deuce, it's almost a blunder. It's like 0.07 not to make your deuce point in reply. And a lot of people get that wrong. And if you can make your opponent nearly blunder on the reply, that's pretty appealing. But it's so hard to follow up. I've given it up. For a while, I was just, as a point of pride, because I wrote the article, I'm like, I'm working on my game when I make the deuce point. And it's really hard. And it's hard for a long time. It's a strange play. So anyway, I would recommend running.
Yeah. So
With
this
the
is so
6-4.
the top play by XG is to make the 2 point, as you mentioned, which ends up in this position, and the running play is close,
Right.
and it results in this position.
Yeah, I would recommend people who like making the deuce point, I would just recommend playing like 5 exchanges, like with XG. And this is a great way to train. Just see if you
Right.
can go the next, 4 or 5 or 6 plays without making really bad errors.
Yeah, and this is the splitting play that results in this position.
Yeah.
One of the things I've learned and I've spoken about and I've studied is basically there are 4 major ways to win in backgammon without doubling the opponent out. You can race, you can prime, you can attack, or you can have a defensive strategy of a holding game. Now, if you run, you're kind of committing yourself to a racing game. If you make the point, it's more of a commitment to an attacking play. And then the splitting play is actually nice because it's not as committal. You have multiple game plan options. I remember specifically reading about this topic in one of Bill Roberti's books. Modern backgammon, non-commitment.
Right,
It's
right.
really
Yes.
good. So when you think about these things, it's important to understand that when you do make that play, it can be committal. So in response to the 3-1, the top play is to run, and in this example, it's not as close. This is the resulting position after running, whereas after splitting, it's here, and then the making the point is an error. One of the things that I think about is, they say backgammon is ultimately a race. When the opponent opens making the 3 point, they gain 4 pips, right? So if you're down 4 pips, the average roll is about 8. So you're going to roll 8, so you'll be down 4, so it'll be pretty much even. So if you roll a 6-4, now you're going to be up 6, so you're going to be ahead in the race, which makes that's kind of how I think about it. It makes sense to do a racing strategy when you're against the 6-4, 4-2. They've gained 6 pips, and now you're gaining 10 pips, so you're still on 4 pips. So it makes more sense to make the 2 point. And that's kind of where studying started with me. And I think these are important. Your article is very good because I tell people, as I said, the most important position is the opening position. So the first roll, the second roll, if people frequently make these small errors, it adds up. Yeah. And additionally,
I think what it's easy to not notice, on any given play. Maybe it's like this, it's only 0-8, which later in the game is not a big deal. We make checker plays in complicated positions, like 0-8 is not something I worry about. But if you're doing it in the opening, it's like every game you're maybe just falling back on your heels a little bit. You're not getting the kind of nice attacking positions as often as you ought to, or you're getting attacked or you're getting primed just a little more often than you ought to be.
right.
Yeah, I agree. It matters a lot. I
And
think
go
one
ahead.
of the,
Go ahead, please.
When you're talking about the race thing, part of the reason the 6-4 pointing play is so hard to follow up is that 10 is a good racing number. It's a lot of pips, but you're not racing. Since you're leaving your back checkers alone, you're stretching out. And I think Mark Olson had a nice term in one of his first books called the connectivity zone or something.
Yeah.
And the idea was that, when you're racing, like if you're ahead on the race, you want to shrink the connectivity zone. You don't want to stretch out. And here, like this is almost the biggest connectivity zone you can have. It's 23 pips from your stragglers to your front guys. So it winds up being this like really stretched out position. So it's a racing number, and if you don't race with it, it leads to, weird, weird,
Right.
unfortunate.
I call it an overextended position.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing that you mentioned is it's true. Like when you study these opening ones, you learn the ideas and the strategies that are important for later in the game where the error might be bigger.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's a common one. The other one that I wanted to look at is a pair of positions where the opponent opens with a 6-4 split, and a lot of the times I see positions like this misplayed. So this is going to be the same opening roll, but different second rolls. The first one is a 6-5 in reply to an opening 6-4 split, and the second one is a 5-1 reply to the same opening 6-4 split. So how do you think about these?
Right. Okay. Well, the hit on the bar point is quite clear in both cases, right? You're not going to leave that checker alone. You're not going to just play 24-13. When your opponent sallies forth into like happy anchor land on your 4 or 5 point or the bar, you're going to challenge it. You're not going to let that pass. So you're definitely hitting here. The biggest difference between these two plays is that with the 6-5 you see here, you hit with the 6, and in doing so, you bring another checker into the zone. So you hit from the midpoint. Now you've got 9 in the zone, and you can use the 5 to hit and unstack a second point, right? You're unstacking both your big points. You're putting them on the bar, and you're also giving him only 11 return shots. The alternative here also is just not that great. Like if you could hit with the 6 and split, you might want to do that. But you can't. So you'd be playing 13-7, 13-8, which is you don't really need to take 2 points off the mid. That early in the game, having only 3 on the mid is a little bit light. So hitting twice is very attractive, right? But the 9 in the zone issue is the big one. It gives you a credible attack, right?
And then
With the 5-1, you're hitting off the 8 point. So you're not bringing any material into the zone. You only have 8 checkers. And so going after the guy on the ace point is just a big overplay. You're kind of committing to an attacking plan when you don't have enough material. Oh, my watch is talking to me. So you hit 8-7, now your 8 point is stripped and your midpoint remains stacked. So this should just look like an ugly distribution, right? So that would be my main take on this.
Right. So looking at this for the 6-5, the correct play is to hit twice, like this, resulting in this position. The second play is actually bringing 2 down, which is almost a blunder. And then the natural play is a blunder of 24-13.
Oh yeah, you can't do that.
And then with the 5-1, the best play is just hitting once like that because of what all the things you mentioned. Hitting twice is a small error, and that leads to this position. And one of the things I tell my students is, I feel the opening position is the most important position to study. And in the opening position, I feel like there are major liabilities and there are minor liabilities. For each player, the major liabilities are the 2 back checkers because you have to get those back. They're far away. They're 11 points away from the next point in your army, whereas all the other ones are connected within 7. So that's the major liability. If you can try to escape yours or prevent your opponent from escaping his or hers by making some sort of a blocking point, that's useful. And then the secondary liabilities, and this is not just what I said. When you read Bill Roberti's books, he says this too, are the stacks on the midpoint and on the 6 point. One of the things that I kind of wrote in my book, but I haven't seen it in other books, is it's more difficult to unstack the 6 point than the midpoint because you cannot play a checker from the 6 point with a six in the opening.
Mm.
Further, if you play it with a five, assuming there's a one or no checkers of your opponent here, it goes very deep. Whereas you can play sixes and fives. And then you really want to use these checkers to unstack into the 5 point or the 4 point, and these ones to bring down. So learning about these things, like having 9 checkers in the zone versus 8 checkers in the zone, having a spare on the 8 point is important. Once you strip it, you really want to do something about that. I feel like I've learned a lot by studying these, by reading your articles, by all of these things, and I think that's helped me a lot.
Great. Yeah. 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 And the other great thing about studying and kind of getting deep into the whys and wherefores, it just makes the game more interesting. You know, it makes the action of playing, instead of just moving checkers around and getting thrills off the crazy swings, like the intrinsic thought process of every play becomes more intriguing, uh, and that's just good for your game.
Yeah. Well, good. That's been a lot of things that we've discussed. I really enjoyed it. It's you have a very unique perspective given your interest in the history, and you have a lot of information there you've compiled on your website. I'll go look through it some more, and I'll put a link in the
Oh,
description.
good. Yeah, do that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any other final comments before we go ahead and conclude?
No, I think this is very enjoyable. I always like it doesn't take much to get me talking about backgammon or anything else, really. I just I hope people find me approachable. Like if I'm at a tournament, I'll be at the New York tournament. I'm always looking forward to meeting new people and players of all levels of expertise. And the New York tournament's one of my favorites, and it's nearby, so I always look forward to it.
Yeah, that's good. I tell people, backgammon is a game. We do it for fun. It should be enjoyable. There should be a social aspect of it. I really enjoy meeting people. I've met a lot of people doing these interviews and videos,
Hmm.
but they're all virtual, and I always hope to meet some of them in person, including, of course, yourself. And I'd love to have you for future videos. Sometimes we do the matches against the bot if you'd ever like to do
Oh,
that one. The
yeah, that
back,
would be fun. Yeah.
yeah, that's always a fun one.
Yeah.
I really
Well, and I
enjoy
hope I'll
it.
see you out in California sometime too. I'd like to make that trip. I know that I'd Candace knows how to throw a good tournament, and it's just an awful long flight.
I know. It's a great tournament. Patrick has been running it for over 40 years, and Candace has been helping for the past, I believe, 5 to 10 years. And I've been helping with them. It's always fun to be able to just even see people. Sometimes people take it extra couple days before and after to kind of do that things to
Right.
enjoy.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it. I also want to express my gratitude for all the work that you've done with all the historical stuff and the articles. It's very enjoyable for everyone to read.
Well,
So
you're welcome, and thanks for the invitation.
my pleasure. We'll go ahead and conclude. I want to thank the viewers for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and you'll be notified every time I upload a new video. Please let me know what you think in the comments below and what you'd like to see in future videos so I can work on that. Again, my book, Backgammon, Backgame Strategies, is available. There's a link in the description to where you can get it. And if you're interested in lessons, please contact me via email. My email address is in the description. I look forward to seeing everyone in future videos. And until then, keep rolling your dice.